Lucas, former leader of the Green Party, a fabulous Green MP, and somebody that we have worked very closely together on lots of agendas and has appeared across the country talking about the environment when it comes to Europe and our relationship with Europe. Does Nick Clegg in Sheffield need any introduction whatsoever? Former Deputy Prime Minister, and again, somebody that all of us, I think, you know, who have, despite me being a Conservative, a progressive view about this country, feel very, very strongly, and Nick has had a very strong voice in that, and also consistently, continuously, a passionate pro-European, absolutely knowing what the UK both gets out of Europe and what the UK contributes to Europe. Baroness Shirley Williams, a star of the last referendum, and in many ways, you know, you did it for us in the 70s to ensure that the Labour Party actually came round and was there fighting the right battle and getting the right result. And we know that having you on our side absolutely doubles the odds in favour of us winning. That you have been an absolute stalwart on this issue, sometimes up against a lot of difficulties when it came to party politics, but also, you know, out there making the case across the country. So it's a great pleasure to have you here. And Matthew Fulton, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the European Movement, a Labour activist, and very much involved in the Momentum movement that, again, we hope to be able to galvanise in this debate. So, thank you all for being here, and thank you for our fellow panellists. Everybody is going to have 5 to 7 minutes just making their case, and then really very quickly it will come to you. We want to hear your views, we want to get your understanding of what absolutely makes the case in Sheffield, because this is a campaign that needs to be won in every street, in every city, in every town. This is a campaign that is currently being run on the air wall. Ultimately, it is about us getting people out to vote. And I just wanted to outline some of the challenge. If we end up with a 40% turnout, the Remain side has to be 15 points ahead in the polls. If we get a 50% turnout, we will end up needing 7 points ahead in the polls. So our objective all here today, and through all our political networks and our other networks, is to make sure that we hit 60% turnout. With that, I know, we all know, that the British people want to stay in Europe, want to play their part, want to lead, not leave, but ultimately we have got to enthuse, excite, and also inspire them to go out on the 23rd of June. So I want to thank you as part of this team in ensuring that we get the right result on the 23rd of June. Thank you very much. I would like to...
Thank you, Laura, and thank you very much to you and your team for organising this. And it's very good to see you all here in the middle of the day on a slightly grey Sheffield day, but nonetheless very good to be here in pretty sizable numbers. I'm assuming pretty well all of you are in favour of staying in the European Union. If some of you are not, I think you're going to feel a little bit lonely today, because the purpose of this meeting, as Laura has said, is really to underline why those of us who do believe that Britain's long-term future is best served by remaining in the European Union, that we work together across party lines in order to reach out to the largest number of people possible here in Sheffield and elsewhere to secure that all-important vote on the 23rd of June. I really want to just make 3 points to get the ball rolling. The first is this. The more I hear the debate, if you can dignify what we see every day on our television screens with that now, the more I hear the claim and the counterclaim and the fact and the counterfact, and all the, as Laura sort of implied, all this sort of aerial bombardment from the main protagonists, shelling each other furiously with allegation, counter-allegation over and above our heads, the more I realise that what is at stake is not actually what people think about Brussels, or Europe, or this directive, or that directive, or this fact, or that statistic. Actually, what is at stake is what we think about ourselves. That's what is really at stake. This will shape us. It'll shape what Britain will be in the future. It'll have a dramatic impact on the kind of nation, the kind of community we are for decades and generations to come. Are we going to be an open country? Are we going to be a closed country? Are we going to be engaged with the outside world or disengaged? Are we going to be generous-spirited towards others in far-flung places, or are we going to seek to turn our back on the problems of the world? Are we going to remain a United Kingdom at all? Because it seems entirely plausible, as night follows day, which is a pretty plausible thing, if you can call it plausible, you know what I mean, that if we were to pull out of the United Kingdom, and if that were to happen because of a particularly strong vote in England to leave the European Union, whilst a majority of Scottish voters voted to remain, then it seems to me Nicola Sturgeon has an unanswerable case. I would find it nigh impossible to then argue against a renewed push for Scottish independence, because the SNP, as they have made quite clear, they made no secret of this, would say, well, hang on a minute, we want to remain part of Europe, Scotland does, we're being frog-marched out of Europe against our will. The only way we can secure our continued position in Europe is by pulling out of the United Kingdom. So it's not just one union that is at stake, our place in the European Union, but it's two unions. It's our own union as well. And our country faces many, many dilemmas, many difficult choices we need to make, many crossroads that we need to navigate. But it seems to me absolutely essential, for reasons that I'll expand on a little bit more, a tiny bit later, that if we want to secure the best, safest, most sustainable, most prosperous future for ourselves and for our children and our grandchildren, we can only do that by remaining an engaged, open United Kingdom and not a dismembered, fractured, isolated country. The second point is this. The more I've listened to the arguments from the, again, if you can dignify what they say with that label, the arguments from the Brexit campaign. I mean, there are many things that inevitably anger me about what they've said, the sheer mendacity of a lot of the claims that they made. I mean, I've been through the ups and downs of politics for a long time now. I've got a pretty thick skin. But even I am pretty shocked by some of the willful mendacity of intelligent individuals who know that what they're saying is not just statistically debatable, is false, is downright false. That's bad enough. The nasty, highly personalised, offensive way in which they seek to discredit and shout down anyone who says anything they disagree with. So, Obama must be wrong because he's part Kenyan. So, what an extraordinary thing to say about the President of the United States. Christine Lagarde says what she does because she's been bullied by George Osborne. Mark Carney, he should shut up, he's a Canadian, he should lose his job. Everybody's just branded as a liar, as corrupt, as a charlatan, as a fool. It's a really nasty political vocabulary that has debased this campaign even more than it was bound to be, I guess. We borrow huge amounts of money every day, every week, and every month from other people elsewhere in the world who allow us to pay our way by borrowing money to us. If that stops, we have an outright economic catastrophe. And I can't see any better catalyst for that sort of merry-go-round of borrowing and debt to come to a crashing halt than pulling ourselves out of the European Union. Then, of course, people who lend this money to the United Kingdom will start asking themselves, is my money going to be safe? Is the United Kingdom going to survive at all? All of that will have dramatic, immediate and direct knock-on consequences on the livelihoods of millions of our fellow citizens. But the Brexiteers, they won't feel it. And that's what makes me more angry than anything else. There was a there was a donor to the Brexit campaign I heard the other day who said, if we pull out of the European Union, there'll be a great deal of insecurity. And insecurity is great. It might be for him, but not for the millions of ordinary citizens who will suffer that insecurity. Aaron Banks, another major donor to the Brexit campaign, said that the several thousand pounds that it has been estimated, yes, of course the estimates vary, but everyone agrees that most working families in this country will be a lot poorer if we leave the European Union. It's a price worth paying, he said. But it might be a price worth paying for him, because he can afford to, but not for others. And that's what makes me so angry, is that they advocate a catastrophic course of action, the consequences of which other people, in other words, poorer other people, will have to suffer the consequences of, not themselves. And my third and final point is this. Just imagine the European Union didn't exist. Just imagine we were all, according to the Brexit vision, hermetically sealed sovereign states, returned apparently effortlessly to a 19th century gunboat diplomacy era where the declarations in Parliament rule the waves, and we don't need to bother about what goes on the other side of the channel, we don't need to worry about the rest of the world, we reign supreme. Even if the European Union didn't exist, we would have to invent something very, very similar to it, for one big reason. I cannot think of a single dilemma or challenge or threat or opportunity which my children, I have 3 lovely little boys, 14, 12, 7, my children or your grandchildren, I cannot think of a single major challenge, whether it's cross-border crime, whether it's the quality of the air we breathe, the cleanliness of the water that we drink, whether it's the footloose, fancy-free gyrations of global economics, whether it's the movement of hateful, extremist and violent ideologies. All of these things cannot be dealt with on our own. And that's the great fallacy. That's the great fallacy of the isolationists, is that they talk the language of sovereignty, but actually they want to deprive future generations of the wherewithal, the capacity to control their own destiny. Because if in the modern world, if you don't work with other countries, if you don't work hand in glove with our European neighbours, our European kith and kin, then we weaken ourselves. We actually reduce our sovereignty. We significantly diminish our ability to influence those events, from international crime to climate change, to investment, to global trade talks, which will have such a dramatic impact on the livelihoods and well-being of future generations. So for those and so many other reasons, we really are engaged in a monumentally important campaign of a significance that I think is impossible to exaggerate. From the existence of our very own country, through to the sustainability of our environment, to the basic security and economic well-being of future generations. That is what is at stake. That is why it's so important you've come today. That's why I'm so thankful you are here. That's why I'm so thankful to Laura and her team for organising it. And that's why, once we have all congregated together this afternoon, I hope we will all spread out far and wide to persuade those who are presently unpersuaded that when push comes to shove, it is better for the United Kingdom to remain a member of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you tell me when it is 5 minutes? Because, sorry, I lose track. Yes, well, thank you very much to the European Movement for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. Fantastic that you're here. And just really to continue where Nick left off, really, this sense that this is a major conversation that is going to really affect the future of all of our lives, and that there is not one single big crisis that we face today that is going to be made any easier by trying to tackle it on our own. And I think it's important to say as well that the EU does need to be reformed. I don't think any of us up here are saying that the EU is perfect. Nick and I have seen it up close, and it has Shirley and others. And we know that, yes, it needs to be reformed, but you You need to be there to change it, number one, and number two, you know what, Westminster needs to be reformed as well. But I don't see many on the other side saying they're all going to march out of Westminster and out of the UK because we don't like the way Westminster works. No, you stay in it to change it and to reform it. And I must say, when it comes to the whole discussions about how democratic the EU is, yes, I want it to be more democratic and more accountable, but to be lectured on that by Tory MPs who are in the government, elected on 24% of the vote, seems to me a little bit And I want to make sure that we make a distinction between some of the flaws of the EU institutions on the one hand and some of the neoliberal policies of right-wing governments on the other, because they are not the same thing. So when we discuss the EU, I think it's really important to make that distinction between some of the policies we don't like on the one hand and the fact of the need for those institutions on the other. And of course, if there's any issue that really illustrates this more than any other, it probably is TTIP, that famous Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Treaty. And for those of us who are not very enamoured of this treaty, not least because it sets up the ability for private corporations to sue democratically elected governments if they don't like what those governments think of as perhaps health and safety regulation, but as far as the corporations are concerned, this is nasty red tape that they need to get rid of. You know, that is a good reason to be against TTIP. But the best way to fight TTIP is precisely by fighting it in the EU, where we've already seen 250,000 people marching on the streets of Berlin. We've seen 3 million people across the EU sign a petition against TTIP. We've seen the French government actually now threatening to block TTIP as well. The bottom line is that we can stop TTIP tomorrow if we persuade our members of the European Parliament to do that. That is what democracy is about. But to complain about TTIP and therefore think that's a good reason to leave the EU is just so misguided. Because you know who was one of the biggest cheerleaders of TTIP? It is David Cameron himself. And if anybody thinks that by withdrawing from the EU we're going to end up with a lovely, cuddly, friendly trade policy, let me disabuse you now. We are not, because that same investor-state dispute settlement mechanism will be inserted in any bilateral trade agreement that successive governments are likely to introduce. So the point is to stay in the EU and to fight for what we believe in, not to ditch those institutions, to make the distinction knowing that if you put right-wing policies into the EU, because right now there's a majority of right-wing governments at the Council of Ministers, then you get right-wing policies out of the EU. That is not a problem of the EU, it is a problem of the policies that are going in. The same thing when it comes to the common agricultural policy, the common fisheries policy. Lots of things I'd like to see improved on those, although they are going in the right direction. But the problem with them is not the fact that they're common. The problem is with some of the policies that are being enacted. And that comes right back to us in our own country, as it comes back to the people of many other countries around the EU to be fighting to make sure we have more progressive governments representing us in the EU. But please don't think that is a reason to be walking away from the EU. Now, I'm not going to talk about the economics very much because you will hear the economic arguments every time you turn your radio on, every time you put the TV on, every time you open your newspaper. And frankly, I think it's beginning to bore most of us. I think it's very clear, broadly speaking, that we're going to be better off in, financially. But I want to talk about the ways we're better off in other ways as well, because I worry that we're not going to be able to reach so many people who actually want a kind of a values-based reason to stay in the EU. They don't want just a narrow transactional calculation about how much we put in and how much we get out. They want to know that their identity and their kids' future and their friends are going to be part of an outward-looking, confident Britain, not one that is turning its back on others and trying to solve problems on its own. And I think if we need any issue that demonstrates that more than any other, it is the issue of the environment. We know that environmental problems are by their very nature cross-border. They don't wait politely to have their passports checked at borders. They cross borders. And so air pollution that blights many of our cities in this country, for example. Now, some of that air pollution is coming across from France and other countries. And so we are going to need cross-border solutions to solve those problems. Climate change is the example beyond all others. How could Britain possibly be serious about trying to tackle climate change on its own? And there I have to say in parenthesis, there really is quite an interesting crossover between those who are Eurosceptic on the one side and climate skeptic actually on the same side. There is a very big crossover there, and that's because people just don't really like regulation, they don't like any rules, they don't like something that is telling them that we need to change our direction. But if anybody believes, as sometimes the Brexit campaigners will say, that our environment is safe in their hands if we leave the EU, then let me just suggest politely that they've not been paying very much attention. You know, this is a Prime Minister who is telling us that he wants to ditch the green crap. It's the Chancellor who is saying that some of the most precious protections of our nature that we have, the Birds Directive and the Habitats Directive, are unwanted red tape that he wants to get rid of as well. The environment is not safe in the hands of this government, or I would argue successive governments, and we need European rules to be able to address that. I can see out of the corner of my eye that Laura's looking a little bit twitchy, so let me just finish with one last point. And this is not the point that David Cameron has been mocked for saying, and I think he's been wrongly quoted, but it is a point about peace, because I genuinely think that we take for granted the peace that the EU has helped to bring us at our peril. That this has not been a traditionally very peaceful continent. And I'd suggest to you that the EU is not some abstract project born in the Brussels think tanks. This project was born of the bones and the bodies of people who died in 2 ferocious world wars. And I think we forget that at our peril, I really do. And that is not to say I think World War III is around the corner, but it is to say that there was a very good reason for creating the EU in such a way to make sure that war in the future is not only unthinkable, but impossible. And we have had 70 years of peace. I'm not saying the EU is the only reason for that peace, but it has played a really important role. And I think that as we move forward into an increasingly uncertain world, to throw that away would be incredibly, incredibly irresponsible.
Well, I'm very pleased to be on this platform. I'm very pleased to be on a platform with such a remarkable cast of people speaking to you, and thank you very much for coming on this rather otherwise gloomy day. I'll start where our last speaker finished, because I think she made a crucial point, and I want to try, if I may, to emphasize even more than she has done some of the things that she said. And I hope that you'll notice one thing about this meeting, and that is that those who are speaking at it are not trying to rip off other people or make malicious challenges to them, but rather to try to get across the most key issues of this campaign. And they are, in the end, what are sometimes called existential issues. They are of crucial importance. Well, let me start then by saying that one of the things I'm going to do next month, and some of you will do too, is to attend the anniversary of the Battle of the Somme, where 52,000 people died on the first day of that battle. And if you look at that story, that terrible story, because that was only one day after day was the same, what you discovered was that the leaders of that time decided that they had to take a political action to escape from the endless cycle of war that had occurred across this great continent for 200 years. That's absolutely right. It's also worth saying something else as well. Many people will look at someone like me and they'll say, well, that's what old people talk about. They're always going back to the past. It can't happen anymore. It's all over and done with. We haven't had any wars for 70 years, as Caroline said. But don't forget, because memories are very short, that only 10 years ago, on the edges of the continent of Europe, we had concentration camps, we had torture, we had starvation. It was in a country which is called Kosovo. It was next door to the European Union. And we had in it a replay on a small scale of some of the worst things that happened in Nazi Germany. Nobody can ever say that that danger has been put to bed, because it can easily arise again. In Kosovo, what finally happened was a combination of European concern with NATO action ended the possibility of a breakdown of law and order, of decency, of humanity in the little country of Kosovo, surrounded as it was by Albania and others, and likely to be sunk into the kind of warfare that we thought was over. Caroline is right. It's never safe to make an assumption of that kind, because even today, around the edges of our own continent, there is a process of rearmament taking place on a huge scale, such that we have to say that there is now a real possibility of an arms race because of the extent to which we have not managed to control it within our own continent and beyond it. We need the European Union to be a force that will take that on and prevent it from happening. Let me take a second example. perhaps best said in a largely Labour city like Sheffield, because it's something that I find extraordinarily puzzling. Caroline mentioned that today, and you may have read it in the newspapers, the French police broke into the office of Google in Paris. They broke in because they were convinced that there had been things going on that meant that Google was not paying its proper share of taxation. Or for that matter, Amazon. Or for that matter, half a dozen other multinational companies, which we in our own country have not tackled at all. Do you remember the Chancellor settled for £180 million from Amazon, when the estimate was that it probably owed many, many times that figure? I'll give you the figure. It made £225 million profit in this country, and it paid £5 million in taxation. The British government didn't dare take it on. You may remember that Mr. Osborne announced his achievement in getting £130 million out of that company. You'll also know that the same battles are going on with other multinational companies. And when Nick said, and he's quite right, that we have to recognise that solidarity is everything, and that talking in terms of there being some attempt to try to get other countries involved is what you need if we're going to deal with some of the biggest challenges of them all. And one of the great challenges which a Labour city like Sheffield should have deep in its guts is the possibility that people will be put across, have things put across them, because they're not taking on misuse of power in that way. Let me give you a striking example. The Commissioner for Competition in the present European Union, a wonderful Danish lady called Margrethe Vestager, has told us she expects to pick up literally hundreds of millions of euros, pounds, dollars, by getting the big companies who are multinational to pay the proper levels of taxation. She's talked about that in the last few days. In our country, we don't even seem to bother very much about it. And when we're told by the Leave campaign that what we ought to do is to get rid of the European Union and put the money that we pay them as a subscription to it into saving the National Health Service, I wonder whether it ever occurs to them that the amount of money that we lose on unpaid taxes would pay for that 10 times over. And yet we don't bother very much about it. Let me take a third example, and that's addressed particularly to women. If we've recognised that women have been very little part of this whole discussion, because too much of it has been about, frankly, and I hope Laura will forgive me for saying that, about a discussion about the succession to the leadership of the Conservative Party, which has taken over...
to apologise to me.
taken over huge amounts of this campaign is what I was trying to say. An awful lot of it is about battles between a couple of elderly gentlemen or middle-aged gentlemen as to who should be the next leader over the body of the present Prime Minister. It's so sad that we aren't talking about the really serious things. Caroline has talked about climate change. She knows better than I do that the discussions at Paris, which were literally saved by the European Union, and not least by the French government, produced at long last at least a reasonable start to dealing with greenhouse gases and all the rest of it. Please note that last month we had the last of a whole length of 12 monthly increases in temperature, each one breaking all previous records. The whole of 2015 breaking all previous records. And the countries that are trying to do something about it are the European Union. Finally, let me conclude by saying absolutely that talking about sovereignty, when what one really needs is to bring together a group of like-minded countries with a very strong commitment to democracy and to freedom of speech, is the best way to deal with some of the most powerful forces in the world that regard democracy and one government as not very significant at all. And let me say, as Nick said, that looking at the things that confront us, that confront our children and our grandchildren, it would be an act of almost total madness to walk out of the biggest trading bloc in the world. And that's what's been said not only by a lot of business people, but by the Prime Minister of India, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Prime Minister of Australia. In other words, not just the EU countries, but almost the whole of the Commonwealth takes the view that we should stay in and then fight for them inside, because that's what we can most often do. Thank you for listening. But please don't forget the crucial question will be, do people who feel strongly get out and vote? Because if they don't, we won't win. If they do, we will win, and we'll be grateful for generations to come for having done so.
Thank you so much, and wonderful contributions, all from different perspectives, but absolutely giving you the messages that we need to ensure that the public know that we do not gain greater control over our continent, over our country, by losing control in our continent. And I think it's absolutely crucial we get that message out. But this meeting is for you, so please do ask us some questions. Matthew will be answering on behalf of the Labour Party as well, but ask us what the issues that you think are important, but also how can we ensure that we win this referendum.